Deep below the loose dirt and fairy chimneys of Cappadocia lies a vast network of tunnels and chambers stretching 85 meters into the earth. Today, these cramped, quiet tunnels are quite inhospitable. Flashlights reveal bare walls, unfurnished chambers, round stone doors fallen out of place, and the occasional weathered cross carved into the volcanic rock. This network of voids hardly seems suitable for a tomb, let alone someone's home, but that is exactly what Derinkuyu was used for thousands of years. Derinkuyu, or Deep Well, was an underground city in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, most likely built by the Hittites around 1200 BCE. Derinkuyu was a refuge for Christians in the 7th century during the Islamic raids and was occupied up until 1923. Yes, that 1923, like 100 years ago, 1923. During the Greek-Turkish population exchange at the end of World War I, Derinkuyu's underground complex was abandoned and seemingly forgotten, but not for long. After being rediscovered in the 1960s, Derinkuyu has been a popular stop for backpackers, travelers, and adventurers on their way through the Anatolian countryside. Apart from its prominent feature in 2011's Assassin's Creed Revelations and the wild imaginations of ancient history conspiracy theorists, Derinkuyu seems to have been mostly ignored by the outside world. Let's change that. Subscribe and hit the like button because today we are going to explore a prehistoric warehouse, the last refuge of Christianity, and the world's deepest underground city, Derinkuyu. Before we keep going, I wanted to say that this video is sponsored by no one. It's a one-man show and I don't have any sponsors, don't make any ad revenue yet, but if you want to support the good work of sharing well-researched history with as many people as possible, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so that you can keep up to date with all of my videos. And if you really like the content, make sure that you share it with a couple friends who are also interested in history or the past or just want to learn cool new things. Okay, back to the video. The first mention of underground cities in Anatolia, the peninsula that makes up the modern nation of Turkey, is Xenophon. Xenophon was an ancient Greek writer from the 4th century BCE. In his book Anabasis, Xenophon describes how people in Cappadocia, the region of Anatolia where Derinkuyu is, lived underground rather than carving homes out of the cliffsides like other Anatolians. Modern scholars date the first levels of Derinkuyu back to before 1200 BCE. Prior to 1200 BCE, the Hittites occupied the region. Accounts vary, but the general consensus is that the Hittites originally dug out rooms at Derinkuyu as storage. It was when the Phrygians invaded in the 1200s BCE that Derinkuyu was first used as a shelter during wartime. Whatever happened, Derinkuyu failed to save the Hittites, who fell to the Phrygians. Not a lot is known about this early era of the underground city, but many scholars theorize that it was the Phrygians, who are known as some of the most skilled architects of the Iron Age, that were the ones who built the underground complex into the vast underground city that it has remained as until today. Okay, so you might be wondering, how do people living in 1200 BC dig giant tunnels and an underground city out of solid rock? Like, that seems like it would be a really hard thing to do even today. How could they possibly have had the technology back in 1200 BCE, over 3,000 years ago, to do all of this? Derinkuyu is dug into soft, easy-to-carve volcanic rock. This is very important because the soft rock tufa could be cut away with hand tools. So you don't need a giant tunnel boring machine or a backhoe or construction equipment to dig out this rock. You can do it with an iron pickaxe. Tufa is also strong enough to carve tunnels and moderately sized rooms out of without the roof collapsing. Cappadocia is also reasonably dry, keeping the flood risk down. Into this volcanic rock, the occupants of Derinkuyu dug kitchens, wineries, stables, bedrooms, toilets, monasteries, chapels, armories, and miles of tunnels connecting everything. All of this was designed so that as war raged above, life could carry on below. Falling down. Most of the time, life was carried out in the top 2 floors at Derinkuyu. Since they were the closest to the surface, the top floors were where the kitchens and the stables could be. Animals needed to be taken outside frequently, at least when there wasn't a war on, and you can't fit animals down the narrow passages that led deeper down into the city. Imagine living in a stable 100 feet underground with nowhere for the smell to go, and you can start to understand why they didn't put stables at the bottom of the underground city. Kitchens need ventilation for the smoke from oven fires to go, so they also couldn't be put deep underground. Just like how restaurants today have fume hoods so that the whole area, the whole room, doesn't get covered in smoke, you can't just light a fire, again, 100 feet underground and expect people not to suffocate. The kitchens each had one dugout oven in the center of the room with a ventilation shaft right above. It's likely that because of the limited amount of space, kitchens were communal, which means that multiple families would be preparing food in the same kitchen. Derinkuyu was not spacious by any means, so unless you really like living shoulder to shoulder with family and strangers 24/7, it's probably not the most pleasant life. So Derinkuyu had a very complex ventilation system, with over 50 ventilation shafts dispersed throughout the complex, so that if one of them was covered up during a war, you could still get air from some of the other ones. This complex ventilation system kept the tunnels supplied with fresh air, and the rock walls kept the temperature stable year-round. However, the halls could only be navigated single file, with most people needing to be able to stoop to avoid hitting their heads. Being underground, there is no natural light. So people in the 7th century, when Derinkuyu was at its fullest, had to solely rely on candles to see. Wine cellars, vats for pressing grapes, and jars for storing wine have been found at the site. No, they weren't having ragers in underground tunnels, fun as that might be. The wine was stored at the lower levels as preparation for being trapped down there for months at a time. The lower levels house meeting rooms and monasteries. Inside Derinkuyu, there is a complete Byzantine-era missionary school with dedicated study rooms. The presence of rooms with religious functions in the lowest levels of Derinkuyu show how important constant religious practice was for the 7th century occupants. Especially while trapped down underground for months during a raid, religious study and prayer probably would have been the only interesting or positive experience at Derinkuyu. Why am I talking so much about Derinkuyu in the 7th century? Because that's when it was at its most full. Estimates run as high as 20,000 people living in the underground city at one time during the 7th century. That's 20,000 people living in purposefully tight living spaces with no sunlight, sleeping practically on top of each other, and doing their business in jars for months at a time. The more you learn about life in Derinkuyu, the less it sounds like a quirky life choice, and the more it sounds like a waking nightmare. One, we haven't even talked about what life would have been like in Derinkuyu during a battle, which, I mean, it's bad. It's very bad. And two, what would drive people to choose a life like this? Why would you want to live underground and live crammed into these tight spaces? The Prophet Muhammad, founder of Islam, died in 632 BCE and was succeeded by what we now call the Rashidun Caliphate. This kicked off several centuries of war between the believers, the original early Muslims, and anyone who didn't want to be conquered. by the Abbasid Revolution and the Banquet of Blood in the 750s, see my Banquet of Blood video to learn more, the Muslim Caliphate had conquered everything from Spain to India. However, the Byzantine Empire, simply known back then as the Roman Empire, stopped Muslim expansion into Europe. Cappadocia, where Derinkuyu is, remained nominally under the Byzantine Empire during this period. However, Muslim raiding parties had largely free reign over Anatolia. Whenever the Byzantines were seriously threatened, they could hide in Constantinople, a legendarily impenetrable city, until the Muslims got bored of raiding Anatolia and went home. You might see a problem with this plan. What about the towns and cities east of Constantinople? The Byzantines always came back to reimpose imperial rule, eventually, until they didn't. But what do you, living in Derinkuyu, do in the meantime? You dig a hole like it's your first night in Minecraft. The underground city grew to 18 floors and had multiple locking doors to section off the lower levels when an army tried to raise or chase them underground. They also had small shafts between the upper and the lower chambers that allowed communication even during a lockdown. The tunnels between the chambers were short and narrow, preventing armed and armored soldiers from easily traversing them. There is even evidence of trap tunnels where invaders would get lost and the defenders would shut them in and let them starve. While Cappadocia was nominally under the control of the Byzantine Empire until the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 CE, Muslim raiding parties invaded Anatolia all the time. After Manzikert, the region was controlled by the Seljuks, who encouraged the immigration of Turkish communities. From the mid-14th century until World War I, yes, that World War I, Anatolia was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, possibly the most powerful Muslim empire in all of history. All this means that Greek Christians, while not always actively persecuted during Muslim rule, they were increasingly becoming an ethnic minority. Derinkuyu and other underground cities in Cappadocia naturally became permanent safe havens for Christians of the region to seek refuge in for thousands of years, from the 600s through the 1920s. During a crisis, historical evidence shows that the defenders in Derinkuyu held out for as long as 6 months. Of course, life in the dark, cramped underground city was not pleasant. With 20,000 people living there for months in what was effectively a human-sized anthill, people had no privacy or personal space. The paths are practically impossible to navigate, with dead ends and frequent cave-ins. There were miles-long tunnels connecting Derinkuyu to other underground cities, but finding them during a siege was nerve-wracking and practically impossible. The experience of sieging or being sieged in Derinkuyu would be a vision out of hell. Invaders, if clad in plate armor, would be jammed into narrow hallways, blocking the way for people to go in or out. People would fall dozens of feet down steep stairways carved into solid rock. Invaders would dump refuse down air holes and wells to poison the water supply and then cover them up to suffocate people. The screams and sound of battle would echo through the chambers and through the communication holes. So even if you're safe down in the lower levels, you can hear the screams and the sounds of battle of people trapped in the upper levels. Oh, and speaking of screams, all of the enemy soldiers who got trapped in those trap hallways, you could hear their muffled screams as they starved to death for days. All of this would be happening in pitch black darkness. Being locked in the lower levels would be a nightmare of its own, with no stoves for cooking, no real furnished bedrooms, feet away from the underground graves, and absolutely no sunlight for weeks or even months. Surviving in the deepest depths of the underground city would be a fate synonymous with death. video. Oh. Wait, I'll be right there. If you're an Assassin's Creed fan and thinking, wait, this sounds nothing like the big open cavern city in Revelations, then you're a lot like me. Apart from its feature in the main story of Assassin's Creed Revelations, Derinkuyu seems to not have appeared in any popular media, with the exception of BS Ancient Aliens documentaries, or the debunked Ancient Apocalypse Netflix show. Check out Milo Rossi over at Mini Minuteman for his multi-part series taking down that mess of a show. In AC Revelations, Ezio, the main character, is tasked with tracking down and assassinating a Templar leader who has taken refuge in the underground city. The story of Assassin's Creed Revelations, which is set mostly in Constantinople some 50 years after its fall to the Ottoman Empire under Mehmed II, centers around a Templar-backed Byzantine counter-revolution against the Ottomans to re-establish the Byzantine Roman Empire. Note, in Assassin's Creed, they frequently call the old regime the Byzantine Empire, but the term Byzantine was not used to refer to the empire until centuries after its fall. And at the time, people would simply have known the empire or the people or the regime as Roman or the Roman Empire. It's actually reasonably plausible for a Byzantine-backed coup against the Ottomans to be organized out of Derinkuyu. Since Derinkuyu was, for centuries, a refuge for Greek Christians and was an incredibly secure hiding spot, it makes sense that any planned revolution by Greek Byzantine loyalists would be ran out of it. There isn't anything to suggest that the specific coup attempt depicted in Revelations ever happened, but from a historical fiction standpoint, the plot doesn't conflict with the historical record. But that is where the historical accuracies end, unfortunately. In the game, Derinkuyu is a wide-open cavern filled with mud brick single-family homes. People seem to live there year-round without going outside, and there's plenty of light and plenty of space, no claustrophobic tunnels, and only one main floor, and no depictions of deeper levels for people to lock themselves into during a siege. There is also even a massive wooden fort inside the central chamber. Based on historical, archaeological, geological records, and every other type of record I can find, all of this would be completely impossible. Most of Derinkuyu survives until today, and while only half of it is open to the public, there is no indication that there was ever any giant chamber at all resembling the one from Assassin's Creed Revelations. From a gameplay and game development standpoint, the version of Derinkuyu in Revelations makes sense. It would have been very difficult to have any compelling combat or story moments in the real Derinkuyu. As I mentioned, any armor would only get you stuck in narrow passages. There was basically no room to move, let alone fight. And forget about hiding in haystacks or leaping down from ropes on your target. I also understand that building brand new game mechanics, lighting systems, and assets to create a true-to-life underground city probably would have doubled the development time of the game. But as a historian, I am definitely left shaking my head. Throughout the Ottoman era, Derinkuyu was regularly inhabited, but never again did it reach its 7th century heights of 20,000 occupants. The Greek Orthodox Christian community had greatly diminished from its pre-Seljuk population in Anatolia, and despite the fact that Christians were second-class citizens in the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman state brought a greater degree of political stability to Anatolia over the nearly 6 centuries that it reigned over the region. The end of Derinkuyu as an active site came in 1923, during the Greek-Turkish population exchange, following World War I. World War I resulted in the Ottoman Empire being dissolved, and its vast territories, which at its height covered over 60% of the Mediterranean coastline, were divided up and became independent nations, protectorates of European empires, or really some combination of both. During the war, many Armenians and other Orthodox Christians from around the Ottoman Empire fled to Derinkuyu and the other underground cities as the genocide began in earnest. After the war ended, the Turkish government that succeeded the Ottoman state signed a treaty with Greece to exchange Greeks living in Turkey with Turks living in Greece. This is a story for a separate video, but simply put, thousands of Greek Christians who had lived in Anatolia for thousands of years were uprooted and sent back to Greece. The survivors in Derinkuyu were among those who were sent to Greece, and the underground city was sealed and forgotten. In 1963, a local living in the modern city of Derinkuyu, which is all above ground now, kept losing his chickens. Wait, I promise this is relevant. During a renovation of his house, he discovered where they were going off to. The underground city. People were immediately fascinated with old Derinkuyu. It was open to tourists in the late 60s, and you can still explore it today. Though a lot of travel guides say if you are claustrophobic, do not go there. It's very tight, very dark, so not for everyone. It's not a tourist stop for everyone, not for the whole family. Half of the city is open to the public, and many of its sister cities are as well. There are still many passages that have yet to be explored and excavated, and there's still many secrets remaining in the tunnels at Derinkuyu. While today it's no longer actively occupied, the tunnels still stand, and the ventilation shafts are still open. Many people still use the ventilation shafts as water wells even to this day, and there are still many rolling doors in place. For thousands of years, Derinkuyu has been a site of last resort in a violent and unpredictable world. The underground city will likely remain a final, impenetrable refuge for those in need for thousands more to come. Oh, what was that? Right. Campbell just said make sure that you like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my future videos. And I also just wanted to say I love making these videos. It's truly a passion project, and I wasn't kidding earlier when I said it's a one-man show. I do all of the video editing, all of the camera work, all of the research, and obviously all of the presenting. So if you want to support what I'm doing here and you want to share the love and passion of history, then just share out this video to anyone in your friends, anyone of your friends, anyone in your family who loves history or is just curious about learning awesome and interesting new things. If you see anything that you want to elaborate on or talk about, do so down in the comments. It really helps boost the engagement. I don't know what else YouTubers are supposed to say. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos. Remember, people change, humans don't. Thanks for watching.